Wait.
What?
Stop pulling your weeds.
Why?
They're doing an important job right now. If you want to come sit with me, I promise I can explain everything. Okay, so to explain to you why I don't want you to pull your weeds, at least not yet, we have to start off by talking about why certain plants are weeds in the first place. So weeds are just plants that are generally disturbance specialists. They set up shop in disturbed soil, and they're a problem in gardens because guess what? We're disturbing the soil all the time, and so of course they're going to show up. If you think about your garden as an ecosystem, every plant has a role to play, and like in any ecosystem, if there is a role that is unfilled, something is going to come in and fill that role. So for example, one of the biggest reasons that you might see weeds in your garden is because you have bare soil. Maybe you've tilled your garden or you've pulled all the weeds and now you have nothing there. And the soil does not like that. It is much better for the health of the soil if it remains covered, protected from the sun, and then kept a little bit damp by the protection from the sun. And so plants are going to come up in that space and serve that purpose. And so once you understand this kind of basic concept that plants fulfill roles in your garden ecosystem, then you can stop looking at weeds as the enemy and start looking at them as both helpers and also indicators of your soil health, because the helpers, the weeds that get sent in to tackle a certain area, are going to be pretty specific to the problems that they're trying to solve in that area. All right, so let's start by digging a little bit deeper into some of the different roles that weeds can play in your garden, how they're helping, and also what they are indicating about the health of your soil in those areas. So first of all, like I just mentioned, bare soil is not really well tolerated in nature. The second you have bare soil somewhere, you start seeing weeds creep in to cover it. Some people like to say Mother Earth is modest and she will cover herself. And I think that's a really fun way to think about it. But on a scientific level, there are microbes that live in your soil and they do not do well with direct UV contact. And they live in that top little bit of soil. So if there's nothing covering that soil, you will kill off those microbes. And that's not very good for the health of your soil. And the plants that are going to come in and try and solve that problem have evolved to fit into this niche. They're going to be able to grow where other plants are going to struggle. And so the first things that start popping up in this disturbed bare soil are going to be things that are really good at covering the ground. They're going to be pretty low growing because they don't have to be tall. They're not competing with other tall plants like they would be in, say, like a forest setting where you don't see as many of these like weed type plants that we see in our gardens. So a good example of a plant that is playing this role is chickweed. Pretty much anywhere in the US, you're probably going to find chickweed in your yard or in your garden. It is a very good ground cover, especially because it can come up pretty early in the season before some of the other plants are starting to wake up. You might also be seeing purple dead nettle and henbit starting to come up in your area, and these are also doing a really good job of being early and coming up and making sure that the soil is covered early in the season. And so if you pull these weeds before you are ready to recover the soil, well, guess what? You are going to probably kill some of the microbes that are doing a good job keeping your soil healthy, and you're going to immediately get more weeds because what do? They come in and cover that bare soil. So when I'm thinking about plants that are acting as a living mulch in my garden, I really only tear those back in the moment when I am planting something in that spot that I know is going to need the space and the sunlight. Another problem in your garden that weeds might be stepping in to solve right now is compaction. There are plenty of weeds that we see that thrive in very compacted soils, and that's because, well, not a lot else can get its roots deep into that soil to actually survive. And so the plants that are good at that are going to be the ones that tend to end up in those areas and survive the initial sprouting process. And so plants like this are going to be plantain, dandelion, anything that sends down a really big, deep taproot is going to be doing a good job breaking up compaction in your garden. And this can be great if you want a nice loose soil for all of your other garden plants to thrive in. And so if you pull them before they've had a chance to do their job, then your soil is still going to be compacted, and that's not going to be very good for the stuff in your soil. So again, these weeds, I like to leave them in place unless they are directly in the way of something that I want to plant. Building off of that, oftentimes a lot of the plants that have a really deep taproot are going to be able to mine up minerals that some of your other plants can't reach. So if your soil is not very mineral or nutrient rich, then these plants like the dandelions and the plantains and anything else with a really big deep taproot, maybe curly dock, these come in and they can reach deeper to get minerals up to the surface. And then when you cut back the greens and leave them on the surface, it is like cycling the nutrients up from deeper to the surface, where over the next few months they can kind of decompose and be a nutrient source for the plants that you are going to be planting in your garden. And so if you never allow these types of weeds to thrive in your garden, then you are going to be reliant on like outside inputs of minerals and other nutrients for your plants to thrive. And again, you can look at these plants as indicators of what is missing in your soil. So dandelions, for example, are famously good calcium pumps, and they tend to show up in areas where there's not a lot of calcium available near the surface. And so you'll see the dandelions thrive in places where their plants can't, because the dandelions can reach deeper for that calcium, whereas the plants with the shallower roots cannot. This next category you might have heard about before because it's very common in large-scale agriculture, and that is a nitrogen fixing cover crop. So a lot of times in between crops on an agricultural, professional scale, they will plant things like clover or soy or something that is a nitrogen fixer in order to kind of replenish the nitrogen in the soil for the crop that's coming next. And there are weeds that do this job as well. So like I said, clover is a big one. If you have clover in your garden, all it's doing is fixing nitrogen into the soil that will then be available for your next plants that come after it. And there are a bunch of different types of nitrogen fixers. I can give you some more examples on the screen, but they're just a little bit less common. Most people wouldn't really know the common names of those. But if you look for them, you are really likely to find them because it tends to be a cyclical thing that the soil needs. You plant something that feeds on the nitrogen and then it's depleted. And so a nitrogen fixer will come in and take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil for the plants that come next. Another role that the weeds, especially in my garden, are playing right now is they are the very first flowers of the season. They are pollinator food and beneficial insect habitat right now. Early in the spring, a lot of times you don't have anything out flowering in your garden on purpose, and weeds can fill that role. Many of them flower first thing as soon as it warms up, and I've already seen a ton of bees and wasps feeding on the nectar from these flowers. And if you didn't have those, then those pollinators would find somewhere else to go and set up shop and kind of live out their lives. And we actually want them to stay. So if we provide habitat for them to be here from the beginning of the season, then you're much more likely to have those beneficial insects all year. So a good example of this is the purple dead nettle and the henbit that I mentioned earlier, dandelions as well. Pretty much anything that is flowering first thing is going to be beneficial for those pollinators and of course the other beneficial insects as well. And so beyond having a benefit to the garden itself, a lot of weeds will have benefits for you as a gardener. A lot of weeds are edible or they're medicinal. And if you want to learn more about that, this right now is actually part of a series I'm doing called Weeds with Worth, where I go over the worth of some of the weeds that are in your garden, and I specifically talk about how they can benefit you in an edible or medicinal way. I'll link that playlist down below if you want to check it out when you're done here. So I'm not saying that you should let weeds entirely take over your garden, although sometimes that is what ends up happening to me. And I really, truly, honestly feel like my garden has been healthier since I have been less obsessed with pulling every single weed. So if you can kind of shift your mentality away from I need to get rid of the weeds towards I need to have healthy soil, then you can start to see the weeds as the helpers and the indicators that they are. They're going to help you fix some of the problems, and they're also going to be telling you what problems they're fixing in the meantime, and that will really help you be able to do a better job taking care of your garden. So if you enjoyed this video, I think you're really going to like this one, where I talk about the weed that my mom swears by actually fixed a lot of her big digestive issues that she's had kind of chronically for years. So stick around to check that out, and thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I wish you happy gardening.